for this segment of my diary, I want to look at some ideas which were touched upon at various stages in the discussion over the last few weeks between us as in our study group, and it's really about how the use of various communication media affect the way we think and affect the way we communicate with each other, and the way that we perceive things. So take for example me at the moment. If you were sitting opposite me, we'd be having a very different kind of experience, form of communication than we are at the moment. You'd have the opportunity to respond to points, to interrupt, and through the use of body language to indicate approval, disapproval, boredom, interest, and so on. There would be a dialogue going on, even if I was doing most of the talking. You know, but the reality is this is a recording, and it's a one-way. It's me talking to, I suppose, a defined audience in one sense, in that the tutor, the assessor, is the primary audience, and possibly other people, other students, and so on. But a particular audience in mind that I'm addressing. But it's a recording, and that recording and the image and sound of me talking can be perceived in different ways. If you watched it in a cinema, projected large, or a lecture theatre, there would be a different kind of experience, you know, in a darkened space with other people, perhaps a more social experience than if you watched it in your home on a television set. And then again, a different mode if you're watching, as you probably will be, watching this video in the context of a video website, on a web browser, on a computer, in an unknown context, perhaps a domestic context, perhaps a work context, perhaps an internet cafe. That's the kind of architectural or situational context that one would see this video, but one might also see it, or you might also see it, in the context of, you know, banner advertising, other windows in your browser that might be open onto different websites. Perhaps you have internet chat running in the background. Perhaps there's some other functions that your PC is performing or reminding you about. Perhaps an alarm goes off, a calendar event, perhaps some signal that you've received, some email is received, all kinds of other possibilities that can interfere with a particular focus of viewing this recording, which would not be perhaps significant factors in a different environment, or the factors would be different, shall we say, if you were watching television or if you were watching in a theatre type environment. So you know, that little example, I suppose, just illustrates some of the difficulties around receiving and digesting and reading information through different communication media, and it's something that's of particular interest to me, is how people view and read information online. And I think there are a number of issues around that if we compare it to, say, let's take another example, text information, and this is quite pertinent to the educational context. You know, traditionally, you know, many courses give out reading lists of sources. Many of those would be paper publications of one sort or another, books, journals, magazines, and so on. As more and more of that information is placed online, you know, the perception and the effect of the media in reading those documents, I think, changes something about them. I would contend, and I think there are others who have said this too, particularly a study by Byrne about how we read and write online, and by Heim. These other researchers, they've looked into how people look at things and read things using computer screens and using internet media, and it's different from the way that we read, say, a book or a magazine. And the reasons for that are, you know, quite evident, really. It's about the interaction design framework that surrounds the text that you happen to be reading from you know, a device such as a PC, or say you know, a mobile phone or a tablet PC. The way in which the information is presented in an interactive environment such as a website is very different from that. The text is laid out differently from the way it is in a book. Even where a document such as a PDF file or an e-book is read on a device that attempts to simulate some of the formal qualities of a book, such as a Kindle, for example, there's still differences there in terms of the tactile feel of the object, the way one interacts with it. You're shuffling through menus and buttons rather than turning a page, for example. All of these aspects combine to make reading through electronic media a different experience from reading from paper, and that tends to affect how we create information using these new media also. You know, the extreme example would be something like text messages in Twitter, where you know, the tendency is to create incredibly short texts, and those texts are not you know, formally composed in the same way that, say, a traditional essay or a novel or a short story are composed. You know, they have less formal structures. They are conversational. One can see this also in email. Email is a longer format. It allows longer texts, but still the tone of writing in emails tends to be much more informal and conversational than, say, in a formal letter. You know, and this is about the fact that these texts are composed as part of a communicative dialogue. You know, that thing that I referred to at the beginning. They're part of a conversation. They're intended to be two-way. They're intended to be responded to, you know, in a direct way, either instantaneously or very shortly afterwards. They're part of a passing to and fro of information. And I think that this syndrome, this way that we communicate online, produces different effects for those that are very used to communicating in this way. And this has real serious implications for you know, education, in that, you know, there's a generation of students who are the young and undergraduates of today who have grown up with these media, and communicate in these informal, chatty ways, remotely, not face to face necessarily, but remotely, as a matter of course. And that is the way that they look upon communication and writing and reading to a large extent. That becomes a kind of dominant mode for many people now, which is quite different from the dominant mode that preceded it, which was about much more structured, long-form texts. You know, it's possible that because higher education in particular is quite a specialised field, and academia is a specialised field, that the behaviours of academics can be transferred and passed on to students as a kind of specialist knowledge. It's a specialist way of reading and formulating texts. But, you know, anecdotally, you know, to a greater or lesser degree, one can see the influence of this informality of language on the way that many students present their papers and essays and journals in coursework, because they're less familiar with formal writing than, say, the generation that went before them. So I suppose my question is, you know, how can we adapt to this new environment, the way that people habitually communicate now in text? How can we adapt that to an educational environment which is predicated upon a very different means of communication? You know, it's a difficult one to reconcile, and I know that many teaching staff, you know, have mixed feelings about the impact of these technologies and these forms of communication on you know, the way that coursework is processed and tackled by students. But it's something we have to get to grips with. You know, how can we preserve what's important about intellectual inquiry and academic rigour and you know, structured arguments and the like, whilst opening up to the possibilities afforded to us by, you know, mobile and networked technologies. There are some answers out there, but I'm not sure that we have got there yet.